gift this morning, then if you want to do that now, then that would be great, and then take that back to your parents. That would be fantastic. Someone said to me recently that a good preach should start a conversation and not finish it. And I think what I want to bring today is hopefully a little bit of a challenge and also perhaps a conversation starter around what would Jesus see as the big priorities for you? What would Jesus see as the big priorities for you? And we're going to start off this morning by diving right into our passage, which is in Matthew 25, 31 to 46. If you want to have your Bibles and you want to read along with it, great. We're also going to have it up on the screen behind me. So it's entitled The Final Judgment. And it starts off by saying, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then these righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me.' Then the king will turn to those on his left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me.' Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and not help you?' And he will answer, 'I tell you the truth, when you refuse to do the least of these, my brother and sisters, you are refusing to help me.' And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go on into eternal life." Now that's quite a deep passage, and I was aware very much that we've got some younger people in the room this morning. So I found a great little video on YouTube that perhaps explains it for everyone. Get the sound for this, John, please.
Jesus often taught with parables. Those are stories that teach us something about ourselves, like the parable of the sheep and the goats.
I don't get it. What do sheep and goats have to do with us?
Well, it might help if you understand more about them. First, take sheep. Sheep can't really live on their own. They need a shepherd, and they know how much they need him. So they follow the shepherd closely, and they do what the shepherd says to do.
Aw, cute little sheep.
Right. Then you have the goats. Goats are stubborn. They do things their own way. They eat anything, even trash. They don't know how much they need the shepherd, so they don't always follow him.
Bad goats.
Exactly. So Jesus tells about a king who went away. But then the king comes back in glory with all the angels to sit on his throne.
Like Jesus. Jesus is coming back.
Right. Jesus was telling a true story about himself. He is coming back. And when he does, he will separate people like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Some people will go on his right.
Those people are like good sheep?
Yes. Jesus will say to the people on his right, 'Hey, I know you. Come into my kingdom. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And when I was a stranger, you invited me into your home. When I was in prison, you visited me.'"
Wow, they've been busy. When did they do all those things?
Jesus said when they did those things for the least of these, they were actually doing it for him.
Wait, the least of these? What's that supposed to mean?
It means everyone matters to God, and their needs matter to him too, even if they can't do anything for you in return or even pay you back.
So helping them is like helping Jesus in disguise?
Yep, exactly. Then Jesus will talk to the people on his left. Jesus will tell them to go away. Because when he was hungry, they didn't feed him. And when he was thirsty, they didn't give him anything to drink. And when he needed a place to stay, they didn't invite him in. And when he was in prison, they didn't visit.
Wait, why would anyone not help Jesus? Hey, I think I see where this is going. Does that mean those people on Jesus' left didn't help others who couldn't pay them back? They probably did things their own way, like goats.
Right. Jesus said when they ignored the needs of the least of these,
They ignored him. So if we want to do something great for Jesus,
we should do something great for people in need and care for them like Jesus does. After all, he's the shepherd. I'm the sheep.
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 So, what would you rather be this morning, a sheep or a stubborn goat? Now, rather than action statements, which we quite often do, which say, do this or respond like this, thinking about that thought of a good preachers perhaps start a conversation. I got a series of questions instead this morning. And the first one is, how often do we consider that Jesus is coming back to judge the world? And our life group at the moment is working through the book of Revelation. And if you've ever read it, you'll know it's quite an interesting read. But one day, this world will be gone. And there'll be a new heaven, and there will be a new earth. And part of that process is actually Jesus coming to judge the world and asking us to give an account of our lives. And that's what has been referred to here in this passage. You see, when Jesus sits on his throne with all the nations before him, he will separate the sheep, his followers, and the goats, those who chose not to. And this point about Jesus coming to judge the world is backed up in other bits in Scripture. In John 5:26 and 27, it says, "The Father has life in himself, and he has granted that same life-giving power to his Son. And he has given him the authority to judge everyone because he is the Son of Man." And then in 1 Peter 4 and 5, "They are surprised that you do not join in with their reckless and wild living, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead." But it's not just this passage, it's actually the whole of Matthew 25 that is pointing to the fact that one day Jesus is coming back for his bride, the church. And the chapter starts with the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, that we should be on the lookout, we should be preparing for his return. And while we're talking about this issue of judgment, you know, it might be easy to become a little bit nervous or afraid. It's quite a thought, isn't it? But this isn't something that we should be afraid of. The mindset should actually be the opposite of fear. It should be, our thinking should be that this should be a joyful occasion. And I actually wonder if this is why the chapter 25 is framed around the celebration of a wedding. Now, so far this year, we've been to 4 weddings. We've got 2 to go, 4 down, 2 to go. And every time, it's pretty much the same. There's an anticipation and an excitement in the build-up to the bride and groom's encounter. And most of the time, the groom will be the one that's waiting for the bride, opposed to the parable of the talents, it's the other way around. But it's the same principle. And even though that they'll have seen each other many, many times before, there is a nervousness and an excitement, not just from the bride and groom, but for everyone that's there, because this is a significant moment that people have been preparing for a long time. So Lisa, you obviously your wedding's coming up. I'm guessing there's some preparation that's going on at the moment. Yeah, just a little bit. It'll be the same in the Rains household. A little bit, yeah. Bob and Heather have just had Martin and Kim's wedding. A little bit of preparation and excitement around that, I'm sure. And if you think about your own wedding, right? There would have been a preparation and excitement around it. I thought back to our own wedding and just how much I had to do, you know? And one of my jobs, right, was to pick the band. Now, that might not seem a big deal, but when you're trying to pick a band, a Cayley band in Stoke, right? Bearing in mind that my grandfather had taught pipe band drumming for many, many years, and actually, so the European Championships that was at the Bucks yesterday, he used to go and judge that and the World Championships. So I was under pressure here, and I remember the first CD, because that's what it was back in those days, you had to get a CD from the band. And I showed it, I let my granddad listen to it, and I said, "What do you think, Granddad?" And he said, "Not bad," he says, "for buskers." So I was under pressure. I had to pick the band, and I also had to pick my grandparents up from Manchester Airport. I had so much to do for our wedding. But what are we doing to prepare for the groom to come? You know, in the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, it describes those who are unprepared as foolish because they never took his return seriously. So in thinking about the preparation, what would Jesus list as our priorities? And what I love about this passage is it's beautifully simple. You know, I've been around church for a few years now, and I've been to many meetings and conferences. I've even read a couple of books, believe it or not. And I've spent a lot of time with other leaders, and it's often has felt like everyone is looking for the silver bullet, the ultimate strategy that will fill our churches. And as we emerge out of COVID, everyone's looking for, again, that silver bullet, that strategy that will refill our churches and get it back to normal and how it used to be. But I think what Jesus has done in this passage is actually outline the ultimate strategy, the strategy that we should all be looking for. And I said to Sarah, to a few people, this passage has been on my mind for quite a while now, and I've been discussing it on and off with Sarah. And I said to Sarah, when it gets to our time to hang up our dog collars, whenever that might be, you know, if we can look back on our time and say, we fed the hungry, we gave the thirsty a drink, we invited the stranger into our home, we helped clothe the naked, we helped care for the sick, and we helped visit those in prison, I'll take that now. Because that's the things that we're going to be judged on when we have to give an account for our lives. And this is how we actually go about preparing for the groom to return, by focusing on these things. And I think as a church, as individuals, and as a church, if we ever start to develop strategies and plans that doesn't have this stuff at the center of it, then we'll have missed the mark in some way. Because this is how we follow Christ, because these are the things that he did. And this is also how we bring others with us, because this is what demonstrates Christ's love to those around us. This is what separates us from being a sheep to a goat. Now, there's a question that always comes up when people are looking around this passage. Are you saying that we have to somehow work our way into heaven? Now, the first thing I'd say is these are Jesus' words, not mine. But I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase that faith without works is dead. And there was when looking at this and preparing for today, there was a helpful phrase that I found in my study Bible. The basis of our salvation is our belief, but the basis of our judgment is how we have lived. So let's break that down for a moment. The basis of our salvation is our belief, because we are saved by grace through faith in Jesus, which is Ephesians 2:8. But the base for our judgment is how we have lived. Faith without works is dead, in James 2:17. One without the other doesn't work. And this is about having both in equal measure. And I was trying to think of a clever example to make this maybe sink in. And the best I could come up with was a latte. If you think of this, right, a latte without a shot of espresso in it is just hot milk. But a shot of espresso without the hot milk is just coffee. But when the two things come together, it becomes a latte. And we need both elements of faith and works to live a life that Jesus wants us to live. And for me, as I said, the beauty of all this is it is so simple. To feed the hungry, give the thirsty a drink, invite the stranger into our home, help clothe the naked, care for the sick, and visit those in prison. And I suspect we can all right now be thinking of ways that perhaps we've done this stuff in the past or how we could even do it in the future. But one of the things that's listed on there that challenged me, and it kept coming back to me, so I thought it was worth exploring a little bit because it's perhaps not so simple, was the one around visiting people in prison. And I thought if it sits a bit challenging with me, maybe there's other people it challenges this morning. I don't know if you've ever actually been into a prison. I've done it a couple of times to go in and deliver employability talks. And it can be quite nerve-wracking. You're going in, there's security checks, there's barbed wires. Every time you walk through a door, they're locking the one behind you. But from the couple of times that I've done it, the hope that you can share with the prisoners, that they still have a purpose to their life post-release, is actually quite powerful. And I'm going to invite Kay up, so Sarah's mum. So Kay has actually spent quite a number of years before they moved up here going into prisons to minister to, it was a number of guys. And I just asked her to maybe just share a couple of things on her reflections.
This is a few years ago now. It might be 10, 12 years, 15 years. I just began to understand that the Lord was calling me into some kind of prison work. And at that time, it seemed like it was in my face all the time, or a lot of the time. I'd read books about it and that sort of thing. And I just said to the Lord, are you really calling me into doing some kind of prison work? And I just felt that he said, well, yeah, I am. And so nothing happened then for probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. But then my really good friend in Stoke, she started to go into a woman's prison that was close to where we lived. It wasn't in the city of Stoke-on-Trent. It was closer to Stafford. She started going there. And so just a couple of times I went there with it. But I always had this feeling that my calling was for a men's prison. But I enjoyed going there with her. I helped, always helped with the worship because I can play the piano, I can sing. And so I always did that with her. And I just found real blessing in it. But then she got an opportunity to go into Dovegate, and I started to learn about prisons, and I didn't understand the category thing. Number 1 is the most serious prisoners, and then you've got 2, 3, and 4. And so she started to go into a men's prison, much bigger prison, near to Uttoxeter, which is in the other direction, and she asked me if I'd like to go, and so we started really to go in together. And it is strange, like Chris said, when the first time you go in, because you can't take any of your personal things in, except you can take a pen, you can take a bag in with you, you can take books in, you know, Christian books. If you're ministering to prisoners, you can't take your phone in, you can't take money in, you can't take anything like that in. And so the doors do clang before you, but the weird thing was that I was never afraid. I was never afraid when I walked through the doors, and then when you get to the chapel, because that's usually where you're going to minister to prisoners, is in the chapel. And the guys were there, and I never came out without feeling that God had met me and that he'd met the guys there. And you bring something, especially when they are Christians, and there'll be a mixture, if you do go into prison, there'll be a mixture of those who are Christians and have accepted the Lord, and people who are men or women who are just coming to seek. And I did it for several years. In fact, I was still doing it when we came up here. But with the pandemic, I mean, you could pray for prisoners. We could pray for prisoners at this time, because with the pandemic, all those people who were going into prisons, Christians who were giving their time freely, and other people were stopped because of the pandemic, and that must have hit them quite hard. So that's just, we saw men grow. We did a little Bible study on a Thursday afternoon. We saw men grow in the Lord and, accept Jesus, find peace, and find peace in that place, really, to carry on.
Great, thank you.
Right.
So maybe that's something that resonates with you this morning, that you want to pick up. And as Kay said, obviously, like many things during the last couple of years, these doors were closed for obvious reasons. But as they start to open up again, maybe there's something this morning that resonates for you that might be something that you want to explore. But the other bit of this passage that really stood out to me was why these things should be a priority every day for us. And it was that in verse 40, the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." When you feed someone who's hungry, it's as if you're doing it for Jesus. When you are giving someone who's thirsty a drink, it's as if you're doing it to Jesus himself. The same about inviting the stranger in, clothing someone who's naked, caring for the sick, visiting someone in prison. It's as if that you're doing it to Jesus himself. And then our last question to look at. Does this really apply to me today? But doesn't Jesus know how busy I am? Look how many emails I still to clear. That's not my inbox, but it's a universal sign for busy though, isn't it? Mailbox. I mean, because after all, there's probably lots of people doing this stuff, isn't there? And I'm sure the church is already doing stuff like this. So do I really need to actually do anything myself? And the truth is, the church as an organization is. And some of you are part of some of the things that we do and involved in some stuff around this. But what really got to me was the fact that I think we really need to recognize the personal responsibility we have in all of this on a daily basis. The question that's asked in the passage, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty?" So the implication seems to be that people were doing this as part of their daily lives at times without even realizing that they were doing it. It was that much a part of a rhythm of their life. And, the organized stuff is great and it's important. But I wonder at times if it's the hidden stuff that nobody perhaps sees that really pleases Jesus. And in Hebrews 13:2 it says, "Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without even realizing it." So when we're meeting strangers as part of our daily lives, we don't actually know who they are. We could be encountering angels on a daily basis and not even realizing it. And thinking about, the personal responsibility aspect of this, the other part to this chapter is around the parable of the talents. 3 servants were left 3 different amounts of money, referred to as talents, left by their master. And 2 took what they were given and they used it to give the master a good return on what he had given them. But the other one takes it and he buries it in the ground. He doesn't lose it, he just does nothing with it. So when the master returns and asks them to give an account of what they've done with what they've been given, 2 pleased the master and 1 didn't. And the master in the story, just like with the groom, is Jesus. And one day he will come back and those who are expecting him will be prepared, but he is going to ask us to give us an account of how we have used all the resource that we've been given. The master is expecting a return on his investment into you and I. And it doesn't matter if we have a lot or a little, because in the parable of the talents, the three servants were all given three very different amounts. One was given a lot, one was given a little, and the other was given somewhere in the middle. But he asks them all the same question: what have you done with what I have given you? And you might be sitting here today going, but I don't have the time and I don't have the resources. But everyone in the parable of talents was given something, even a small amount. And one of the names that God has, and we will happily sing it out at times and speak it out, that God is Jehovah Jireh, our provider. Now, if we really believe that he is our provider, then he must have provided us with something for us to claim that. Yeah? And I think the challenge of this chapter is around what is it that we're doing with what we've been given that allows us to feed the hungry, give the thirsty a drink. And I think regardless of our age, regardless of our stage in life, regardless even of our financial resources, recognizing the pressure that everyone's under at the moment, thinking about how much time we think we have or perhaps not, I reckon there is something that we can all do on that list of priorities to be Jesus to the least of these. And not doing it from a place of feeling, oh man, we need to do it, otherwise I'm going to get hammered on the day of judgment. That's not the point of all this. It's not about trying to guilt people into doing this. But we should be doing this from a place of wanting to do it as part of our preparation for the groom coming back to collect his bride. We should be doing it from that same place of joy and excitement that surrounds the preparation of a wedding. And this is what Jesus did. And if we really claim to be followers of Jesus, is this not then what we should be doing on a daily basis? And as I said before, at times we'll do it in a corporate way, and as a church we'll come together and plan big stuff, and that'll be great. But for me, the question and the challenge for me, and when I read this, was more importantly perhaps, what does this look like as part of my everyday life? What are the simple acts that we can do on a daily basis that actually make a big difference? And just a quick example, a little story to finish, and then Sarah and the band are going to come and do one more worship song perhaps to finish us. But I remember being in my late teens, early 20s. I can't remember exactly how old I was. And you may have picked up that I have a passing interest in football and occasionally go to games. And back then I went to a lot of games. And Rangers were playing Hibs away. It was a midweek game in the middle of winter. And I have to laugh every time we talk about Hibs away, because Hibs away is always quite a good game to go to if you're a Rangers fan. There's always a bit of a feisty atmosphere, and it drives Caleb mad that his mum's been to Hibs away and he hasn't. That we were outside a chippy in Leaf somewhere where Hibs play, and a few doors down there was a young lad who was a similar age to me, and he was obviously homeless. He wasn't begging, he wasn't asking for anything, but it was a bitterly cold night, and he was just there just trying to keep warm. And it really got to me, and I don't know if it's because he was a similar age to me or what, but I remember standing in the chippy in the warm chip shop with enough money to buy more than one fish supper, and just felt the Holy Spirit nudge. You know when you get that kind of nudge that you need to do something. And you know what I did? Dead simple. I ordered 2 fish suppers. And I went back out and I gave it to one, and his face lit up. Just so grateful that he was getting a hot meal. He hadn't had to beg for it. We just spotted him. And I remember the reaction of him, but also remember the reaction from my friends that were with me. And they were quite taken aback. And it was simple, spontaneous, completely unplanned. But that small act appeared to have quite a big impact, not only on the guy who received the fish supper, but the mates that were with me. They said, well, why? And they asked the question, why would you do that? Because we do these things as if we're doing it to Jesus. We're doing these things to the least of us. It's the simple things. It's feeding the hungry. It's giving the thirsty a drink, inviting the stranger into our home. It's helping clothe the naked, care for the sick, and possibly even visiting those in prison who just need to know that someone on the outside cares and they have hope beyond their prison sentence. And I believe that's what shows the world that we are sheep and not goats. And that's the things that Jesus is looking for us to do every day as part of our lives. Sarah.